Good afternoon, Facebook Live friends. How y'all doing today? I'm going to get this thing going here in just a sec. All right, let's see who's going to come visit us. Who's going to be our first visitors here? Well, hello, Zainab. You're our first visitor. Thanks for joining us. I want to talk today about vitamin D. Very confusing nutrient. In fact, of all the nutrients, vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, amino acids, all the essential nutrients, by far and away the most confusing is vitamin D. There's a lot of reasons for that. First of all, and I'll talk about this in a second, the vitamin D that we get from foods and vitamin D that we get from the sun is not the vitamin D that the body uses. And I'll tell you what I mean here in a little bit, but that, to me, that's what accounts for this mass confusion about vitamin D. Number one, there's different forms of vitamin D. And number two, the vitamin D that we obtain, either in supplements or food or the sun, is not the vitamin D that's used by the body. So you can't really measure, you can't really make a relationship between the vitamin D you take orally or get from the sun and the amount of vitamin D activity you have. So that accounts for, in my mind, that's what accounts for most of the confusion about vitamin D. The different forms and the fact that there's not really a one-to-one relationship like there is with other nutrients between the vitamin D you get orally or through the sun and the vitamin D activity that you have. Hi, Fatima. Nice to see you. Dawn, Liz, Megan. You're such an awesome, loyal truther, Megan. I really appreciate you. Zainab, Maru. Good to see everybody, and I'll get your questions here at the end. I'm going to make this last Facebook Live was super long, so I'm going to try and do this one quickly, which is going to be difficult because there's so much to say about vitamin D. So it's confusing. Another reason why it's confusing is because vitamin D is not really a vitamin. Vitamin D is a hormone. And what I mean by that is vitamins assist chemical reactions in the body. They're assisters. So you have a chemical reaction where A is turned into B. That requires a vitamin in order for that to proceed. So vitamins assist chemical reactions. Hormones do not merely assist chemical reactions, they activate chemical reactions. Cells have little ears, or we call them receptors, and hormones sit in those ears, like a word will sit into your ear, and they sit into that receptor site, or that ear if you like, and they activate chemical reactions. Vitamin D actually goes inside the cell and goes into the genetics and turns on genetic reactions or turns on genes, and that makes it unbelievably important and unbelievably valuable. So on the one hand, it's really confusing. On the other, number two, there's not a one-to-one relationship between the vitamin D you obtain and vitamin D activity in your body, and it's not a vitamin, it's a hormone. It actually activates chemical reactions and it turns on genes. So you can see it's kind of a big mess. There's another vitamin, and that's vitamin A, that also is a hormone technically, even though we call it a vitamin. So it's confusing, it's super important, and it has multiple functions in the body. One of the reasons why it has so much multifunctionality is because its main role is to help the body absorb calcium. And calcium, while most of us, when we think of calcium, we think about our bones and our teeth, and it's true, the vast majority of calcium in our body is in our bones and our teeth. A tiny little bit of the calcium that we get into our body as an essential nutrient through foods or supplements is used to turn on chemistry. Calcium is a signaling element. It's a signaling molecule. It's not really a molecule, but it's a mineral or an element specifically. And it turns things on in the cells. And because vitamin D improves the absorption of calcium, that's its main role, vitamin D, via this calcium absorption benefit, turns on everything. So there isn't a single system in the body, not a single one, and not a single cell in the body that isn't going to be benefit from adequate levels of vitamin D. Now here's one of the, maybe the biggest problem with vitamin D is most of the vitamin D that we tend to get in this country because of our fear of the sun is through foods and supplements. And because vitamin D is fatty, you got to have a healthy and a well-functioning fat absorption system. The liver, the gallbladder, the intestine, the stomach, the pancreas. All of these systems have to be working well in order for you to be able to absorb vitamin D from your foods or vitamin D from supplements. So, and most of us, that's where we get our vitamin D. In fact, the medical model, representatives of the medical model, really suggest that we get our vitamin D from foods and supplements. By far, the most important way, or the best way to get your vitamin D is from the sun. When you get the vitamin D from the sun, you're going to bypass this absorption issue. So if you have intestinal problems, how many people don't have some kind of intestinal problem, especially as we get older? Or if you have a gallbladder missing, or you're not making enough bile, or any of these, or pancreatic insufficiency, you're not making enough stomach acid, this accounts for most people. You're not going to be able to maximize the vitamin D that you get into your blood from food and supplements. So by far, it's better to get, the best kind of vitamin D to get is going to come from the sun. Also, when you get vitamin D from the sun, that vitamin D enters into the bloodstream and enters into the tissues in a slow release fashion, in a sustained release fashion over a prolonged period of time. And that's the way the body likes to get nutrients. The body doesn't like to get nutrients, boom, like a spike where you take it in orally and then it drops. That's the way we get our nutrients when we take supplements or when we get it from food. Food is a little bit slower release because your body has to digest, but it's not a slow release or a sustained release as if you get your vitamin D from the sun. So get your vitamin D from the sun if possible. Expose your whole body, not just your face. Some people think, oh, I'm taking a walk, or I'm walking the dog, or I roll the windows down when I drive, or something like that. You've got to have your whole body exposed. Maximum skin contact with ultraviolet B, UVB. That's the burning ray. So you got to get the burning ray if you're going to get the sun, vitamin D from the sun. You've got to expose yourself to UVB. Sunscreens, of course, we know, most of us know, that sunscreens block UVB. So if you're wearing sunscreens, you're not going to get the UVB, you're not going to get the vitamin D. Darker skin types, African Americans, even Hispanics, people who have more olive tone are going to have a harder time getting vitamin D because melanin blocks UVB. So the more melanization you have, the harder it's going to be to get vitamin D from the sun. You can still get it from the sun, it's just going to be harder. And interestingly, a lot of the health issues that are associated with vitamin D deficiencies affect African Americans and people with darker skin types more than they do Caucasian skin types. So vitamin D upregulates everything, but it's most famously important for the immune system. This is why people are talking about using vitamin D for COVID. There's a lot of literature that suggests that people have autoimmune diseases have problems with vitamin D. So vitamin D affects every system in the body, but most especially the immune system. Also, obviously, the bones. Vitamin D deficiency disease is called rickets, and it's a softening of the bones. And that's because of its calcium. The cardiovascular system is dependent on vitamin D, largely because the cardiovascular system is so dependent on calcium. And then, for our purposes here, and this is what I want to emphasize today, or what I want to talk about today, is the skin. There's a very important connection between beautiful skin and vitamin D. I'll talk about that here in a second. So let me think if I covered everything I want to cover about how you get vitamin D. Let's see here. All right, so there's two main forms of vitamin D. You've got vitamin D2, which comes from plants. It's not plants, but fungus. Also algae, I think, make a little bit of vitamin D2. But specifically mushrooms, that's your most important source of vitamin D2 for you vegans out there, or people who don't want to vegans who don't want to go out in the sun. And then the most common form, the most well-known form, is vitamin D3. Vitamin D3 goes by the name cholecalciferol. So as if all this stuff about vitamin D isn't confusing enough, oh my goodness, got all these people here. Yes, Jill, naked sunbathing, absolutely. Hang on, I'm going to get your questions here in a minute. So as if vitamin D wasn't confusing enough, check this out. Vitamin D comes in. There's vitamin D2 and vitamin D3. So vitamin D3 itself has three different forms. There is number one, vitamin D, which is called cholecalciferol, and that isn't really vitamin D. That is pre-vitamin D. So the way we'll talk about it from the sun, we'll talk about how vitamin D is formed from the sun. You've got something in your skin called a version of cholesterol, dihydrocholesterol. It's a version of cholesterol. It's a type of cholesterol. That is technically referred to as pro-vitamin D3. I know this is going to get confusing here, so bear with me. So you've got this form of cholesterol in your skin. Ultraviolet radiation from the sun hits this form of cholesterol in your skin, and it turns it into vitamin D3. But vitamin D3 is not active. Vitamin D3 has to get converted in the kidney, actually the liver, in the liver into something called hydroxyvitamin D3 or hydroxyvitamin D. That's not active either. or it's slightly active, but it's not really active. The real activity comes from activation in the kidney into something called 125 hydroxy vitamin D3. I know this is kind of confusing, but the point I'm trying to make here is there's steps in vitamin D activation. So vitamin D is made in the skin, it goes to the liver for activation number 1, and then it goes into the kidney for activation number 2. Why is this important? Well, because if your kidney's not functioning as well as it should, or your liver's not functioning as well as it should, you're not going to be able to activate vitamin D. So you may be getting the sun, but you're not going to have the active vitamin D that you need. See how confusing this is? So you got to make sure your liver is working well, and a third of Americans have fatty liver disease. You got to make sure the kidney is working well, and many Americans have kidney disease. You got to make sure everything is working well, which makes vitamin D a real confusing mess to have to deal with. If you're interested in taking care of your vitamin D, make sure that you're working with your liver, make sure you're working with your kidney, make sure that you're healthy on those levels, and get out in the sun. If you're using supplemental vitamin D for whatever reason, make sure that you're digesting it or absorbing it. It's absorbed in the intestine, so if you have any kind of intestinal problems, you're going to have absorption issues. So very confusing vitamin, obviously. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about. There's a lot of things that it does. Most importantly, the immune system, bones and teeth because of calcium. I'm just going to mention this. The parathyroid is also involved with vitamin D, and when your vitamin D levels are low, your parathyroid is going to really be revving up in order to absorb calcium. So, kind of sorry I just mentioned that because that's going to be a little bit. I understand the confusion there, but this is just to show you how interrelated everything in the body is, and how simplistic sometimes we are when we say, oh, we'll just supplement with vitamin D, or just go get your vitamin D from the sun, or don't go out in the sun. Some people say because the sun has been demonized and burning and cancer. People are terrified of aging and burning and cancer. So here's the thing. Vitamin D actually protects your skin from the sun. Vitamin D upregulates skin defenses. And this is really what I want to talk about here is the relationship between skin health, beautiful skin, and vitamin D. So there's tons I could talk about, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to focus here on the skin. So vitamin D, along with vitamin A, helps skin cells, divide at just the right rate. I know I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. Cell division has to happen. Cell division has to proceed in a regulated way. Cells can't just grow like crazy. In fact, the default state of a cell, a skin cell, particularly for our discussion here, the default state is to grow. So under conditions of nutritional deficiencies, especially in vitamin A and vitamin D, cells will grow crazy. We call that hyperproliferation, cells growing too fast. The classic case of hyperproliferation of skin cells, classic disease state, is psoriasis. Acne also involves hyperproliferation of cells, and it turns out that both psoriasis and acne can be treated effectively with vitamin D. Vitamin D from the sun. Get out in the sun if you have psoriasis. Get out in the sun if you have acne. I guarantee you, if you get out in the sun when you are acne prone, your skin's going to improve. If you get out in the sun, if you have psoriasis, your lesions will improve. Vitamin D is a very, very effective treatment for both of those conditions, topical vitamin D, that is. And by the way, there is evidence that suggests that vitamin D creams, topically applied vitamin D3, can actually go through the skin and enter into the systemic circulation. There's some very interesting research out of Saudi Arabia and I think also Dubai that talks about using vitamin D topically as a way to get vitamin D into the bloodstream. So that's just as an aside. So get out in the sun if you want to get the vitamin D benefits for skin diseases like acne and also for psoriasis. Vitamin D also upregulates skin immunity. It turns on the skin's immune system. There are peptides in the skin that are antimicrobial peptides. There's one in particular called cathelicidin, and this cathelicidin peptide helps fight bacteria. And guess what? Vitamin D upregulates these immune system peptides. So again, sunshine or making sure that you're getting enough vitamin D supplementally in food, and of course, making sure that you're absorbing vitamin D. Here's something else interesting. The follicles, hair follicles, the cells that line the hair follicles are also responsive to vitamin D. So there is some literature that talks about baldness and hair loss being linked to vitamin D deficiency because the cells that line the follicle are very responsive to vitamin D, and under deficiency conditions, they're not as healthy. So for eczema, for psoriasis, for acne, also for eczema and for dermatitis, vitamin D can help protect the skin from both of these conditions by supporting skin immunity. For male pattern baldness or for hair loss in women, vitamin D deficiency may be involved. And think about this. Hair loss is a very troubling condition, and nobody seems to be able to figure out what is going on when guys or gals lose their hair. Well, it could very well have to do with vitamin D deficiency. And remember, you can't really measure vitamin D deficiency because we don't know how the body is activating vitamin C unless you get a 125 hydroxy vitamin D test done, that's the test that measures the active form of vitamin D. But interestingly, when most physicians test for vitamin D, they don't test for the active form. They test for just the form that's activated in the liver, not the real strong stuff that's in the kidney. So maybe male pattern baldness is a sign that the body is not utilizing vitamin D, or hair loss in women as well. Let's see what else. Oh, fortified milk and fortified dairy, they're not really great ways to get your vitamin D, but if you're interested in getting your vitamin D from foods, the best source of vitamin D, the best food source of vitamin D is fatty fish. In fact, fatty fish have the highest amounts of vitamin D3, not the D2, but vitamin D3 of any foods. Eggs are also an okay source of vitamin D3. Probably those are your two best sources, fatty fish and eggs, and also organ meats, especially liver. Let's see if there's anything else I want. Skin cancer. Vitamin D is protective against skin cancer. It protects DNA. It also supports the tanning response. So the enzymatic reactions that help produce melanin are dependent on vitamin D. So vitamin D actually has protective effects against skin cancer too. So get out in the sun. That's the best way to get your vitamin D. If you're afraid of the sun and you want to get your vitamin D through supplements or food is better than supplements for sure. Make sure that your digestive system is working well. And then for all vitamin D issues, you want to make sure that the kidney and the liver are also working. So if you have kidney disease, fatty liver disease, you should really be paying extra attention to this multifunctional and very, very confusing vitamin/hormone, vitamin D. All right, so that's, I think I said everything I wanted to say about vitamin D. Let's see here if I have any questions. Shoot me a text here if you think that's too confusing. I know you may have to listen to that again. It is confusing. I'm confused about vitamin D. I've been studying it since my pharmacy school days. It's just a really confusing subject. Is vitamin D the hormone in vitamin supplements? Yes. Yes, Zainab. Vitamin D is the hormone in vitamin supplements. Jill says naked sunbathing. Yes. Don't freak out your neighbors, but that is the best way. And also, by the way, the best vitamin D from the sun, the best sun for making vitamin D is between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. in the summertime, which is the strongest sun. It's got just the perfect angle, and the angle really plays a role in how well vitamin D is going to be produced from the sun, the sun's angle. And the angle of the sun in the summertime is more conducive for vitamin D. This is really kind of interesting about vitamin D. So vitamin D is involved in upregulating everything. When you think about it, vitamin D is the summertime vitamin. This is the time when we were, from an evolutionary perspective, we were out and about, we were going about doing things. So it kind of makes sense that vitamin D would be your summertime vitamin. Summertime, from an evolutionary perspective, is the time of most activity. We tended to sleep in the wintertime. It was cold. In the summertime, we're out and about. And because vitamin D is like a tonic, it upregulates everything and supports all health, it makes sense that in the summertime, your body would make the most vitamin D. Another thing is, because vitamin D is so powerful, because it affects everything. Every single system in the body benefits from vitamin D. You kind of can see why the body, and it also controls genetics, it's an epigenetic factor, you can kind of see why the body would have all of these steps required in order to activate it. In other words, it's kind of protecting itself from too much vitamin D activity, from this hormone. If it didn't have this control mechanism, we could have too much activity from vitamin D, and that could be problematic. So all of these steps in the activation process are kind of protection, just demonstrating the kind of wisdom that's built into our biological system. Zainab says, what did she say? I get bad migraines, so I'm never in the sun. Well, Zainab, you may want to get a sun lamp, and that's another thing you could do is get a sun lamp. They're available on Amazon. They cost you about 120 bucks, and for folks who don't get a lot of sun, they're afraid of getting out in the sun, you might want to consider getting a sun lamp. I don't know if that would trigger your migraines. Now, if you get bad migraines, Zainab, when you're out in the sun, it may be that there's some kind of instability going on in your body. And with migraine headaches, the most common instabilities involve the hormone estrogen and food intolerances or food allergies. So look for digestive issues and estrogen issues, and there's some overlap there as well. Maybe work on fat metabolism, Zainab, and elimination diet, eliminating problem foods, also working with the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut. Oh, also, I know I keep adding things here. There's a very important connection between the microbiome, the bacteria in your gut, and how well vitamin D is metabolized and absorbed into the intestine, which of course makes sense. So again, if you have dysbiosis, messed up gut bacteria, taking vitamin D or even getting vitamin D from the sun may not be as beneficial as it would be otherwise if you had a healthy microbiome. What caused brown sunspots? Too little vitamin C while out in the sun. Jill, I think you're saying what causes brown spots on Caucasian skin when you're out in the sun. That's a melanin instability. It's very common as we get older. I did a Facebook Live last week about melasma. I didn't say this last week, but I'm just going to say this real quick, and I hope I don't throw anybody off with this. There's actually two kinds of pigment in the skin. There's two kinds of dark spots in the skin. There's one dark spot that is the pigment melanin, which is the most common kind. And then there's another dark spot, which is deeper in the skin, called lipofusin, or it's formed by a molecule called lipofusin, L-I-P-O-F-U-S-C-I-N, lipofusin. And lipofusin is distinct from melanin, and that causes the kind of weird geographical shapes that are brown spots that look like the map of France or something. You guys, I'm sure, know what I'm talking about. Those you're not going to be able to treat topically like you would treat melanin. So if you're talking about that, Jill, that's a whole different issue. That's caused by toxicity. That's caused by cells dying and parts of cells not being recycled appropriately. Usually involves toxicity as well as lymphatic issues, and that's what you want to work on with that. If you're talking with lipofusin, if you're talking about melanin, brown spots that show up in appearance when you're out in the sun, in other words, instead of getting a tan, you get brown spots, that could definitely be a nutritional deficiency. It could be vitamin C deficiency for sure. It could be an essential fatty acid issue. It could be unstable skin due to deficiencies in niacin, also deficiencies in essential fatty acids. There's a lot of things that could do that. You could also have estrogen problems. Check out my last video on melasma, where we talked about the relationship between nutritional deficiencies and cortisol and estrogen and pigmentation, hyperpigmentation. I never use sunscreen either. If you're going to if you want sun protection, use a sun block, not a sunscreen. Sunscreens will block UVB, and some of the newer ones will also block UVA. Zinc oxide blocks everything. Sunscreens are toxic. Zinc oxide is not toxic. Zinc oxide actually will heal your skin. So I much prefer zinc oxide. Hi, Susan. Nice to see you. I wonder how we can tell if our liver and kidney are functioning well. Well, you know what, Jill? It's really difficult to tell because the kidneys will, you won't know you have kidney problems until they're not functioning, until 80% of it's not, 80% kidney function is down. So you have to have it tested. They can do different testing. Kidneys are amazing. You could be 80% of your kidney function can be down, but you still can have functioning, well-functioning kidneys. In other words, your kidneys can still be functioning enough that you don't even know you have a kidney problem unless you've been tested. There's a lot of redundancy in the kidney. And then the liver, the most common sign of metabolic syndrome, which is partially fatty liver disease, is going to be blood sugar issues, insulin resistance, although you can have your liver enzymes checked, and you can also have, of course, your kidney functioning tested. Yes, Joe, you can see that later. May says, I'm Asian, I get brown sunspots very easily. May, I'm not going to, there's a lot of things you could do. You should not get brown spots. That's the most important thing. When you go out in the sun, you should tan. When you're a kid, do kids get brown spots? Little kids don't get brown spots, they tan. In fact, you don't get brown spots until you get older, which is when our nutritional deficiencies, our standard American diet, if you're living in the United States, or even the standard world diet, which is notoriously deficient in nutrients, or toxicity, which of course over time our toxicity builds up, and hormone imbalances. All of these issues are why we get brown spots in response to the sun instead of tanning. There are hormone issues, cortisol and estrogen, as I said earlier, nutritional deficiency issues, and that is especially in the antioxidants, vitamin E, vitamin C, also to a certain extent vitamin A, and the accumulation of toxicity. Those are all the reasons why we brown spot instead of tan. Brown spot being hyperpigment. You're brown spotting in the sun rather than tanning. Look to some kind of health issue involving toxicity, nutritional deficiency, or some kind of hormone issues. Go to last week's Facebook Live. We talked extensively, too extensively, I think, because that was like an hour Facebook Live. Robert says, 3 of my siblings around age 60, 2 sisters and a brother have had open heart bypass. They worry about me because I'm 4 years younger. My blood pressure is 110. I live the way you preach. Great. Robert, I know I've been seeing your notes here for a long time. You're doing awesome. And you should be sharing what you do with everybody, because you're doing some awesome stuff with your body, and you know a lot of stuff. Thank you, Robert, for contributing, and thank you for being a truther too. Megan says it's very confusing for people on whether sunscreen should be used or not. I don't use chemical sunscreens, only mineral sunscreens. Mineral sun blocks. I don't mean to be picky here, but these are two distinct terms. A sunscreen screens the sun, and it screens it by changing its electromagnetics. A sun block blocks the sun, and it doesn't have an electrical effect. The sun rays bounce off of mineral sunblock. So those are distinct. You don't want to, in my opinion, you want to stay away from sunscreens. If you're going to use a sunscreen, use low SPF. We talked about that on our Facebook post a couple weeks ago. And then also get it off your skin when you don't need it. I hate these products that have sunscreens built into them. So you got to use the product. You got to use the sunscreen when you use the product. A lot of eye creams you'll see with an SPF of 30. You don't want to force yourself, or you don't want to use a product that compels you to interact with a sunscreen. If you want to wear sunscreen, wear sunscreen. Use low SPF. Get it off your skin as quickly as possible when you don't need it. But use sunblocks. They're way better and way less toxic and way more effective. Let's see here. I use retinol, salicylic. So should I not use? Megan, don't use a sunblock unless you need it. If you need it, you need it. If you're going to go out in the sun, wear one. But then don't wear it if you don't need it. That's my advice. Derms and many skincare companies say using retinol and acids bring about fresh layers of the skin. So you might. Yeah, I know. Oh, that's a good point. Retinol will make the skin a little bit more sensitive to the sun if you overuse it and if you're not healthy. If you're not overusing it and you're healthy and strong, you don't need to worry about it. I know that's not a lot of people, because most of us are going to be nutritionally deficient, just the way we live our lives. Our skin's going to be a little bit unstable, particularly as we get older. So if you're healthy and you're not burning, you're not irritating your skin, don't worry about retinol. It's not like a magical reaction. You'll know if there is an interaction between the retinol you're using, the skin that retinol is being used on, and the sun. You'll burn. You'll be sensitive. You'll be irritated. If that's not happening, I wouldn't worry about it. Likewise with acids. Yes, Megan, I agree. It's very confusing. Use a sunblock, not a sunscreen. Use it when you need it. And if you're going to be laying out in the sun, playing tennis, playing golf, taking a walk in a bright sunny day, wear a sunblock. If you're just going from the car to your office, you don't need a sunblock. Thank you for your help. We did hit the beach one weekend. When I go a 10-minute walk outside, I don't typically wear. Good for you. And try to get as much skin as possible, contact in the sun. Update on my husband. He's using the healing cream. Awesome, May. Omega-6 healing cream is the best topical you will ever use for accelerating healing. The pictures we get are absolutely unbelievable. I mean, they're believable to me because I know what's happening, and they're believable to me because I've seen them for so long. But to most people, they think they can't believe what happens. And I'm sure you've experienced that, May, if you've never used our omega-6 healing cream before. But thank you for that note. Lori says, I love the sun, spent a lot of time outside, recently lost 30 pounds, had a lot of wrinkles and loose skin. Yeah, here's the deal with wrinkles and loose skin after you lose weight. That's connective tissue based. That means that there's a connective tissue issue. It happens as we get older. If you want to prolong the production of connective tissue, or keep the production of connective tissue going the way it was going when you were younger, lots of things you could do. Take our collagen recovery complex. Make sure you're using collagen peptides and eating collagen and bone broth protein, or bone broth protein that's made with real bones. I'm sorry, bone broth that's made with real bones. Bone broth protein is separate. That's a powder, and that can also help you. Vitamin C is the critical element in making collagen and connective tissue. You can use hyaluronic acid supplements. Silica is really a great supplement if you can find liquid silica gel. Zinc is also important. There's so many different ways you can build connective tissue. Staying away from sugar because sugar destroys connective tissue. Cigarette smoke will destroy connective tissue. There's lots of different ways, and that is a common problem. And not just when you lose weight, but just as we get older, that happens. And by the way, connective tissue deterioration, we see it in the skin, but connective tissue deterioration is responsible for a lot of misery inside the body as well. Even cancer is associated with connective tissue deterioration, and cancer cells will literally destroy connective tissue so that they can metastasize and spread and get bigger. Unfortunately, I've had a lot. Okay, so Nicole, yes, Nicole. You're not alone in this. Nicole says she had a large amount of her intestine removed, and this would require her to take higher doses of vitamins. Absolutely, you should be getting IV vitamins, ideally, if you can, Nicole, because you are going to be running high risks of nutritional deficiencies because nutrients are absorbed in the intestine. That's just how it is. Megan says, "Sorry, I meant sunblock." Yes, thank you, Megan. I didn't mean to be mean. I didn't mean to. Sorry if I was mean about that. Had an allergic reaction to adhesive band on my foot, highs and blisters. I'm healing now, but what treatment? Omega-6 healing cream, Dave, by far. And then orally, make sure you're taking our collagen recovery complex. It's great for all healing. All right, so that was half an hour. So I kept a little bit longer than half an hour. And I'm just going to wind this thing down because I don't see any more questions. Vitamin D, super important, super confusing. Make sure you're getting your vitamin D. Best way to get your vitamin D is from the sun. If you're not getting your vitamin D from the sun, then get your vitamin D, and you're getting your vitamin D from food and supplements. Make sure you're absorbing that vitamin D. And remember, the liver and the kidney are responsible for activating vitamin D. So the vitamin D you get from the sun or orally is not going to be you're not going to have a one-to-one relationship between that vitamin D and the vitamin D that shows up in the intestine. Vitamin D is important for all the systems in the body. Because it's involved with calcium absorption, but also there is something called the vitamin D receptor on cells, the VDR receptor on cells. But its main role involves calcium absorption. I think that's it. That's all I'm going to say. All right, you guys, thank you so much for all your love and support. I appreciate you all very much. And yes, Megan says, I'm not mean, I'm only passionate. That's exactly right. I do not ever intend to be mean to anybody, but sometimes my passion comes through, and sometimes people say, oh my God, that guy's really intense. I had a marketing lady that I was talking to help us market the truth, and she said, I was looking at your videos, and she told me I had to turn it down a little bit. Well, I'm going to try to turn it down a little bit. I hope I'm not too intense for you guys. I don't think I am. All right, that's it. Have a wonderful, beautiful, awesome day, and we'll talk to you on our next Facebook Live. I'm pharmacist Benjamin I. Fuchs. Bye for now.